Bonjour, Montréal. Amen. I worked on that a long time, so I'm glad that came off. I'm going to put this away. Can you guys hear me? Well, really glad and excited to be here. My wife and I, we were here very briefly in 2012, and we love the city, love the church, and when we were going on vacation, we thought, hey, where would we like to go? And it was Montreal. So you guys had a great impact on us, and the city had a great impact on us as well. And it's good to see some faces that I've not seen in some time. Some folks who I go way back with, like Caleb McDonnell. Caleb's still here. Caleb is somewhere here. And just connecting with him. I remember babysitting Caleb when he was, but he was an easy babysit. All I had to do was get video games going, and it was good. It's of course great to see Dennis, my brother. Where is Dennis? Oh, videotaping me. Oh. Dennis, we had the privilege of having him intern with the ministry in Waterloo. And so he lived with us for about a month and a half, and that was a lot of fun. Dennis taught me how to speak all the French I know. And so afterwards, I will share with you the French I know, and then you can thank Dennis for his great teaching. And, of course, there's Stanley and Dominique who, came to Hamilton, and they ministered to us, our marriages, as they did the I Choose Us marriage series for us a little while ago. And then, of course, we love absolutely Debbie and Ghislaine. Great couple. They've just been such an encouragement to my wife and I tremendously. When I think of Debbie, I always think of someone who trusts God. That's been evident since she was a campus student going way back. And it's just great to see, how God has used her life in very powerful ways. And I personally want to share with you how much I appreciate the way in which you have, really initiated with my wife. I think her traveling and leaving the States to come to Canada and so forth, you're one of those people she feels like she can call and talk to, get input and advice on different things. So I very much appreciate that. And then, of course, what can I say about Ghislaine? This guy is crazy. No, long before I ever moved to Waterloo, about a year before, we were here in 2012, and it was Ghislaine who said, bro, you should move to Waterloo. And I smiled and nodded, and I went home later on, and I told my wife, that guy's crazy. In all honesty, what I respect so much about you, Ghislaine, is your faith. Just even that, it wasn't even in my radar, but just that faith to take a step and go out there and to move to Waterloo. Your faith scares me at times, But what I also appreciate and respect as well is your passion. And your passion inspires me. When I grow up, I want to be just like Ghislaine, we're very grateful to you guys for, Danny and Jillian moving from Montreal and coming to Waterloo, Hamilton. Shh, I haven't told them that part yet, no. And coming to Hamilton, Waterloo, the whole thing, Waterloo is just a satellite ministry of Hamilton. But, Jillian, I think in the same way, my wife very much feels like she can call you and get input and advice from you. I know she respects just how you carry yourself, your demeanor, all of those things. And, Danny, I'm looking forward to getting to know you much better. We are already working him hard. He's feeling under the weather today, and I think that's because when he spent time at the men's retreat, we were just coming up to him, getting open about stuff, and he was just like, oh, my goodness, Either that or it was the Hamilton air. So if... either way, he's going to need some encouragement because he's feeling under the weather. But really glad to be here. I look forward to there being just more connection between the Hamilton ministry and the ministry here in Montreal. We respect you guys a great deal, your faith and your example. And so many great people who are here, just even Alex and Manuel, just folks I've spent some time with over the years. Really appreciate you guys in a great way. My wife and I, we've been disciples since 1997, as she mentioned earlier. That was really loud, wasn't it? I will tone it down. No. We've been disciples since then, and we've been married for about 4 years. We have one daughter, Michaela, and we love her to death. She's just such a gem. And we live in Waterloo and lead the ministry there. It's a small ministry, it depends when the students are in, but anywhere from like 13 to 17 disciples. That's sort of the size of our ministry. And would love your prayers. I work in that city, in Waterloo, in insurance. So I spend a lot of time dealing with risk and stuff like that. That's what I do. So if you have any insurance questions, you can toss them my way. But, a warm welcome to any friends or family who are visiting. If you're visiting for the first time, I want to give a special welcome to you as well. You'll be glad you came because today, I'm going to talk about something that affects everybody. It doesn't matter if you live in Ontario or if you live in Quebec. Doesn't matter if you go to church all the time or you're just, coming maybe for the first time in your life. It affects everyone. And the title of our lesson today is Extend Forgiveness. Extend forgiveness. We all know that you can't make it through life without being hurt. And if you've never been hurt, I want your life. But we all know we can't make it through life without being hurt. And or being offended or wronged by other people, So what do you do? What do you do with the feelings of irritation, the feelings of frustration, the feelings of anger or hurt that can come when someone has done something to you and it's affecting you, it's eating you up inside? Maybe something happened this very week and you're struggling with it. Or maybe it was something last month and it took perhaps weeks to get over. Or maybe it was years ago, but it still bothers you. And you think too much about it. Someone has done something to you and it's eating you up. Worse yet, they don't even seem to care. Maybe they even go out of their way to cause problems for you. Perhaps they take advantage of you. Maybe they have slandered you. Maybe they've made you the butt of their jokes. They think it's funny, but not so much for you. Or maybe it's your husband doing that thing again. Or maybe it's your wife doing that thing again, Or maybe someone cut you off in traffic this week, and then gave you a gesture of some sort, just for some extra, just for good measure. It's funny, something similar to that happened to me about a couple months ago. I was leaving work, and my driveway is here, and there's another driveway here. We're on the same side. And so I'm looking as traffic is coming this way, and I want to make a right turn. Unbeknownst to me, there was this other guy from the next building over wanting to make a left turn. So, I do this thing, I say I'm clear, and so I make my turn. And then he makes his turn at the same time, and we nearly hit. And I'm thinking, what is this guy doing? I've got the right of way, and I don't know what he's thinking, but he's very angry. And then he salutes me, and then I glare at him as I'm going by. I'm thinking, you work the next building over. Like, I know where you are. I'm going to see you again. Why would you even do that? And so I go home, and I'm just fuming. It's like a short car ride. I go home, I'm fuming, and I tell my wife about it, And then the next day, my coworkers and I were walking to Tim Hortons, and I'm telling them about it. And a short time later, I'm telling some more folks about it. I remember even walking by, I'm looking for his car in the parking lot. And then I start to think, whoa, this is going on a little long here. And that was the time when I was like, oh, well, let's just say that was the inspiration for this lesson on forgiveness. So, if you ever feel like, hey, there are times where it's challenging to forgive, hey, I'm there too. You know, we all struggle with forgiveness at times. In 1998, there was a poll done by Gallup, the Gallup organization. They do polls and so forth. And it found that 94% said that it was important. 94% of people surveyed said it was important to forgive. Okay? So it shows it's fairly universal, that understanding. Whether you go to church or you don't, people just generally understand you don't want to hold on to things. Of that 94%, 85% said that they needed some outside help in order to be able to forgive. Here's the interesting one. However, not even regular prayer was found to be effective. So 94% said it's important to forgive, and 85% said that they had a hard time forgiving. So is forgiveness that hard? You know? And maybe for some of us, we're like, no, I'm good with forgiveness. I do that quick. But let's hold on for a second here. You know, I'm sure that many of us can think of people, maybe certain specific individuals, that we have a hard time being around. Maybe it's something that they've done or they've said or how they act that rubs you the wrong way. And even though you can't put it into words, there's just something there, you know? And then there are those who we're around quite often enough, and there's a lot that goes unsaid, unspoken, a lot of buried hurt, maybe even some disappointment. You know, there are a lot of things that make forgiveness hard, a lot of reasons that we don't let go. But what if I told you that Jesus taught something that sweeps all of those reasons aside? All of those things that keep us from not forgiving. That's what we're going to look at today. I know you guys have been studying Jesus, and so we're going to focus and look at something that Jesus had to teach on the subject of forgiveness, okay? We're going to look at perhaps the best-known lesson Jesus ever taught on that subject. And we're going to do that from the perspective of an eyewitness, someone who was there, a man by the name of Matthew, a disciple of Jesus. Let's see if this works. Let's turn to Matthew 18. Okay. I hope you can read that because it's super small. Okay, in Matthew 18, beginning in verse 21. But I'll give a little bit of background, okay? Jesus had just been teaching disciples, including Matthew, about the need for humility and about the fact that people are going to sin. People are going to do things that they're not supposed to do. People are going to do things or not do things that they are supposed to do. Jesus then taught them how they were to handle the sin of others, particularly among fellow believers. With everything he had said, there was one matter, though, that he didn't mention, and it went unaddressed. And it's the matter we're talking about today, the matter of forgiveness. Jesus hadn't mentioned it on this occasion. And then there's Peter. Peter was there, and like, you know, well, he just needed to know. You know, and in verse 21, it says, then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? You know, it can be hard to forgive isolated incidents, but even harder to forgive when the person, you've had to forgive them before. And then again and again and again. You know, and they keep doing the same thing or maybe even different things, but nevertheless it reopens that wound. You know, and so every time you forgive them, just reminds you of the last time that you had to forgive them. And so he asked this question, how many times? You know, the teaching of that day, of the Pharisees and the scribes, the teaching of that day was that, hey, you were supposed to forgive someone up to 3 times. You forgive them 3 times, the next is on them. You know, and so I think it's a great question that Peter asked, because you know what, I think we ask that same question sometimes too. Where you're like, oh, man, how long do I have to put up with this? You know, and you know, I'm sure Peter was there thinking, well, you know, Jesus, I'm sure 3 is not going to be good enough for him. You know, so he's like, okay, I'm going to double it, and I'll add 1 just for good measure. You know, and so he says, hey, up to 7 times. See, Peter, even though he was raising the bar for himself, he believed that there had to be a limit to how often we should forgive. So he asked, hey, what's the limit? And then in verse 22, did that work? It says, Jesus answered. You know, one thing about asking Jesus a question is you better be prepared for an answer perhaps you were not prepared for, you know. And but I don't think Jesus took special delight in doing that. I think there were just a lot of misconceptions that he had to address. You know, and then he says, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. I mean, who would actually count that out? You know, think about it. Like, just so you know, you're at 69. I'm just saying, 69, you got 8 left. You know, and because if you're counting, then you're not really forgiving. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're like, you're not really forgiving. But to help Peter and the other disciples there understand, and to help us down through the ages understand, he then tells a very pointed story, a parable to be precise. So let's read that together. In verse 23, if it doesn't change for some reason, just let me know. It says, therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. 10,000 talents. You know, Josephus, who was a historian, a Jewish historian in the 1st century, he recorded that in the year 4 BC, that's around the time Jesus was born, the province of Judea, the Roman province of Judea, Samaria, Idumea, Galilee, Perea, those 5 provinces, the amount of tax collected was the staggering sum of just 800 talents. From 5 provinces, they collected 800 talents. So when this guy, this individual, owed 10,000 talents, we're talking about that is a staggering amount of money. And then in verse 25, it says, since he was not able to pay. That's pretty obvious. He owed the equivalent of a national debt. You know, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. It says in verse 26, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay you back everything. He begged him to be patient. What a plea. You know, what an appeal. Be patient with me. Isn't that what we hope for as Christians? That God is patient with us? He says, be patient with me, I'll pay you back everything. That's desperation talking, because there's no way he can pay that back. Even if the master had granted his request, he would have been at that thing forever. And then in verse 27, it says, the master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. You know, the master was in a position to sell the servant, his wife, his kids, everything he had. The servant begged the master for patience, but instead, he canceled the debt. He canceled it outright, wiped it out, tore up the sheet. He just got rid of it. All of what was owed to him, he gave it up because it says that he took pity on him. I don't know if you've ever had student loans, but do you remember? If you have student loans now, I'm sorry for you. But for those of us who had student loans, and then you paid it off. Remember that feeling when you paid off that student loans? And for those of you who do, hey, it's going to be a great feeling, I can tell you that. You know, but when you paid off those student loans, you just felt so free. That pales in comparison to how this guy would have felt. Not having that enormous debt hanging over him. It was a life-changing event. And then Jesus here continues the story. It says in verse 28, but when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him and began to choke him Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. He finds this fellow servant an equal, a man like himself who owed him some money, and he begins to choke him. Remember when he was brought before the master? He wasn't choked. He wasn't choked. But to get his money from his fellow servant, he begins to choke him. You know, 1 denarii was the equivalent of a day's pay for a basic laborer. So this other guy owed him really about a third of a year's pay. Okay? That's a sizable amount. You know, that would be thousands of dollars today. You know, I worked it out. At minimum wage in Ontario, that would be about $9,000. Now, if somebody owed me $9,000, I would like to have it back. You know, that's a lot of money. Hey, different income levels and so forth, but for me, $9,000 is a lot of money. You know, and so I can understand there's a desire on his part to want it back. In verse 29, it says, his fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, "Be patient with me, and I will pay you back." We've heard that before, right? Be patient. It's the exact same plea the servant had made to the master. And I'll pay you back. The exact same thing. And then, in verse 30, it says, but he refused. And that's where all of the similarities end. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. So instead of doing what the master had done, hey, he does something different. He's far from patient. He went off and had the man thrown in prison. Now, this is incredibly disturbing to all the other servants. And it says, when the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed and went and told their master everything that had happened. It bothered the other servants, and word got back to the master. You know, it's important at this time to remember why Jesus is telling this story, this very pointed story. Peter had asked the question, hey, what limit should there be on my forgiveness? How many times do I have to forgive? That's what began this whole thing. When is it okay to stop forgiving? And Jesus told him, you never stop forgiving. But Jesus knew that simply telling him that wasn't enough. He had to help him to understand why. So Jesus tells him a story about a servant who was forgiven of an astronomical debt and yet refused to pass on the same mercy to someone who was indebted to him. And at the climax of the story, we hear from the master. And Peter would have known, okay, I've listened to Jesus tell lots and lots of parables, okay? You know, and the master must represent God. Peter would have understood that. Key in here, focus, let's hear what he has to say. And in verse 32 it says, then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant. The master summed it up all in one word. Wicked. I don't know about you, but standing in front of God, wicked is the last word I want to hear. You know? He said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? What a great question. Shouldn't you have had mercy? Who are we, after having received mercy, would refuse to extend mercy to someone else? We've all got a long list of things that can get in the way of forgiveness, a long list of things that make forgiveness hard, and I'm not here to minimize a single one of them. But do you hear what God is saying here? Do you hear what he's saying? Let's backtrack for a second. The parable tells us that basically there is no one who's done as much damage to us as the damage we've done to God. You know, I say those words, but I know it can be hard to really wrap our head around, you know. But when you think about one simple act of disobedience, on the part of Adam and Eve. Just one, hey, just go eat that fruit. That one simple act of disobedience. How damaging was that? And that was just one. What was the effect of all of that? So take our simple act of disobedience, the consequences of which we don't fully understand. And then you multiply it with all the other things done over the days and years of our lives. And God says, I canceled all that debt of yours. It's a huge debt. Shouldn't you have had mercy? After receiving mercy, why would we refuse to extend mercy to someone else? The key to unlocking the power of forgiveness, I believe, is right here. It's not about what's been done to you or to me. Instead, it's about seeing the staggering amount of mercy God extended when he canceled all that debt of yours and mine. That's where the will to forgive and show mercy comes from. Folks will say that, hey, this, it's our responsibility only if someone comes to us and asks for forgiveness, but because that's what happened in the story, right? The second servant begged for mercy after the wicked servant came after him. But if that wicked servant had had a heart of mercy, he wouldn't have gone after his fellow servant in the first place. He certainly wouldn't have begun the conversation by choking him. He would have spotted him. He would have remembered the debt owed. And perhaps there would have been a rush of feelings and emotions. Hey, I really need that money. But then he would have remembered, hey, I just got forgiven. My debt canceled. A huge amount of debt. I'm just going to keep on walking. I'm just going to keep on walking. If he never pays me back, that's fine. It's really the best I can do, the least I can do. When people treat you badly, don't repay evil for evil. Yes, you have been wronged. Yes, it was not right. Yes, they owe you a debt. But a humble disciple of Jesus remembers the enormous debt of theirs that was canceled. The servant had the opportunity to put his fellow servant in the debtor's prison. But imagine if he hadn't. You and I have many opportunities to put others in the doghouse, our own debtor's prison, so to speak. But imagine if we didn't. You'll have opportunity plenty to retaliate. But imagine if you don't. That wasn't the heart of the unmerciful servant. And at the close of Jesus' story, we read, it says, in anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. That's not the end that I want. And hopefully not the end any of us want either. And then in verse 35 it says, this is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. Jesus didn't mince words here with Peter. Not only that, it's not an isolated teaching. It's a solemn warning several times repeated in the New Testament. And in view of it, we need to pay close attention to the need to extend forgiveness. When he looks at me, does he see someone who extends mercy? Who cancels the debt incurred when I'm sinned against? We need to watch out that we don't fool ourselves either, because we can offer fake forgiveness. Where it's like, oh yeah, I forgive. But then there's awkwardness and weirdness in each other's company, And we got to watch out for that because, hey, when we deal with it, when we forgive, it should open the way for relationship. Forgiveness too it's not a feeling. It's a conscious choice and an action. And I think Jesus is the best example of this, as he is of many things. Because when Jesus was on the cross, and those guys who had just nailed him were busy, throwing dice for his clothes, I don't think he felt great. He would have felt terrible. He was in pain, all those things. Emotionally, it would have been challenging. If he was waiting for an emotion to forgive, it would never have come. Stephen, while he was being stoned to death, prayed, Father, forgive them. If he was waiting, the only emotion he'd be feeling is pain and frustration. I'm just trying to think. If someone's stoning me, what emotion am I feeling? And so it was a choice to forgive. Sometimes we're not able to forgive because we're waiting for a feeling, and we're waiting to not feel the pain anymore. Forgiveness is a choice with actions. And the best action that coincides with forgiveness, I think, is praying positively for the other person. Praying positively for them. If you suspect, even for a moment, that you've got something against someone, pray for them. And I'm not talking about the Father, deal with them, be it ever so severely kind of prayers. I'm not talking about the Father, just show them just how much they've wronged me and hurt me so they feel so sad about it, they come apologize to me. Not those kinds of prayers. But rather, the Father, I've been hurt by them. But I know they don't understand. And in all honesty, these few hurts pale in comparison to the lifetime of stuff I've done to you. And in light of that, how can I not forgive when you died for my sins and for theirs? Let's pray those kinds of prayers. Let's pray them proactively. And even reactively as stuff happens, every negative interaction and as feelings bubble up. I think this also does something else for us. It stops us from being critical and judgmental of other people where we see their shortcomings because we show mercy and grace. It doesn't mean that we don't talk about things, but it changes the tone of the conversation where we go in and we're like, hey, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I'm just one sinner with a huge debt that's been canceled, and we share the same master. I dare not treat you poorly. Hey, I just want to help. As we think about these things, I want to ask, hey, what would this do for your relationship with God, really having such a focused heart of forgiveness? What would it do for your marriage? What would it do for your relationship with your parents? We can harbor a lot of stuff with our parents. What would this do for relationships in the church or at work? What would it do? If you're not a Christian, the truth is you don't have to follow this standard. You don't have to. But I want to encourage you. There are medical studies out there that talk about the value of forgiving. And if you're not a Christian, I have a deep conviction on this, that you can't really have a heart to forgive other people unless you appreciate and have felt powerfully forgiven. Unless you've felt it and how awesome it is and how good it is, it's tough to extend it to someone else. I believe the greatest example of that in my life is God's forgiveness. And so if you feel like, hey man, I'm challenged by, I got a lot of things I can't let go of, and you want to learn how to get rid of that stuff, here's my encouragement: study the Bible. Study the Bible. Study the scriptures and learn about God's forgiveness, because I think that's the key to being able to forgive others as well. So here's my challenge for all of us as we close out our lesson here today. I want to encourage you to make a list. Make a list tonight of people that you may need to forgive. People who, you tend to be maybe critical of or unmerciful towards, and set out to pray for them. Praying positively for them. In the matter we talked about. The strength of Jesus' words on this subject, I think, shouldn't be something that leads us to fear, but rather it sets the tone for the kind of people that I think God is very serious about us being. It would make a stark contrast between the kinds of relationships that exist in the church and in Christian marriages than the kinds of relationships that exist in the world. Let's be those who extend forgiveness, who extend mercy, and let's make forgiveness and grace the atmosphere of our church and a blessing that we extend to those outside as well. Let's be men and women who extend forgiveness. That's our lesson this morning. Amen.